Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on with you guys.
Now, Andy, a couple of things here. I think the first thing that I'd like to ask you about is we all pretty much learned today that Jan has resigned and is leaving. You've worked very closely with her over the last few years as you've become more and more involved in the program. You've shaped the program somewhat. Just talk about the hole you have now and any plans to fill it.
Well, we'll look into it. It's not something that we want to rush into, and it's something we want to look at and find the right person in any situation, and to fill a spot that Jan's left is not an easy thing to do. So we're gonna look at people and think about exactly how we want to go about it and figure something out. But right now we're just sorry to lose Jan, and have a great deal of respect for Jan, both professionally and personally. And I don't think anyone can say enough that the sacrifice that she's giving personally, it can't be easy for her. And I'd like to think that I'm half the person that she is, that I would give up my career to take care of a sick family member. Just can't say enough about how I feel about her.
Well, that's well said, Andy. And in asking you the question, there was no suggestion that you guys were going to be quick to do that, because it's a very difficult job. Because she's on the fly, if you will, or that person is on the fly, and the folks that look forward to that paddock information. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing up here at Capitol on May 31st. If there's any area of the game besides handicapping that folks have to get better at, it's constructing tickets and wagering. And I think, and we think, having watched you at the DRF seminars and with your work at NYRA, building a ticket, constructing a ticket, assessing favorites is what your game is all about. And so talk about what you hope to accomplish when you come up here.
Well, I hope to win. I hope to win for everybody, first and most importantly. So I've ruled out a show parlay. I think, because it's a sufficient amount of money that we have some money to fool around with. Obviously, we want to look at the pick fours, and if there's enough money, I think maybe we should take a little stab at the pick six. And it's a good opportunity to put together a ticket and show how we can put together a ticket and put some money into it, maybe make some money, which would be great, but also, it's an opportunity to use the bankroll to show how, in fact, you would take a bankroll like that and play it on a given day.
Andy, in all seriousness, you're a professional. You've been playing professionally for a long, long time. Your preparation, not only for what you do with NYRA, but for your own handicapping, talk a little bit about that, the time involved, watching races and so on. I mean, because, it's a pari-mutuel game, and we're all playing against people who are preparing in many different ways.
Yeah, the preparation is sort of endless, to be honest. On a given day, I go through the card and I look for, just to sort of get a feel for every race, how the races are sort of set up, whether they're speeds or not speeds, and who's in them and who's interesting, and make notes, and races I need to watch the replays of, and formulators, whether it's formulator stats and trainers I want to look up, but, with shippers especially, and we have so many this time of year, at Belmont with horses that ran at Keeneland or at Gulfstream, and, more so even at Saratoga when we get there, and so there's so many replays to watch of races I've never seen, and I, of course, watch races we've already run in New York, and you go through, and it's 15, 20 replays to watch and some formulator stuff, and then when that's done, I look up the breeding on horses, whether they're first-time starters or trying the turf for the first time, and then I watch replays and go to the formulators and get it all together, and then put the races together. So it's some days are easier than others, but it's a real process, and the idea is to leave no stone unturned, because we're all going to lose a lot more races than we're going to win. But when horses win or you lose, you think, I decided not to use them for X reason and turned out wrong, but that's the way it is. You hate to look back and say, geez, if I did a little more work, I really could have had that horse. And I know that there's a tendency horse players say, I should have had that one. But no, I don't really feel it. It's like you look and think, I really blew it. I really should have had that. And you try to minimize the possibility of that happening.
I agree wholeheartedly. Nick?
Andy, Nick Kling here. My question would be, one of the most difficult things about the handicapping part of the game, and then ultimately deciding, how you're going to structure a ticket, or perhaps key as the top horse, is deciding for each individual race what piece of information or pieces of information, as you described the process that you use, what's most important. Now, for example, I don't recall the name of the horse, but there was a Gary Gullo trained horse that won yesterday at Belmont, a turn back in distance. I almost think that if I recall, you guys might have put up a stat that, Gullo isn't that great with turnbacks. On paper, he looks like he might be the best horse. You've got this trainer stat that is kind of murky. How do you work those things out?
Well, as far as the trainer stats, we have a basic tenet. It's not always going to work out, but you try to find a positive trainer stat for horses that are reasonably good prices, because that way you're offering, here's a reason this horse might be a little more attractive than he looks on paper, and you try to find negative trainer stats for horses that are reasonably short prices. Now, that horse was 7-2, and obviously the scratch made him 8-5, but, you put a negative formulator stat for a horse at the shortest price, you're saying, look, we're not saying the horse can't win, because we all know the horses are the most important parts. But, you've got a short-priced horse, and here's a reason that maybe the horse is a little less attractive. And that's sort of how we try to use the formulator stats. We do not want to put a negative formulator stat for a 15-1 shot. Who cares? You like a 15-1 shot, you're not going to not bet it because the trainer is sort of lousy in those situations. So that's how we go forward with those.
Well, listening to you guys almost every day, it sounds like you kind of subscribe to a theory that Tom and I have talked about here on this show often, and that is you can't be afraid to tear up losing tickets. That if you're afraid, to lose, you will never win.
No question. Right, no question about it. That could be one of the most basic tenets of trying to play the game successfully. You cannot be afraid of losing. This mentality that people have that they could like the same horse and he's 8-5 and bet $100 on him, and if the same horse was 25-1, they'd bet 20. It's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to be worrying about the 8-5s, but when you've got a horse that you think is interesting at a big price, never fear the price, never fear losing. Make a big bet, because that's how you're going to make scores.
Andy, let's shift gears here. The Derby was, an impossible outcome, as to coin or to quote Tom Durkin. It was a tough race going in. There were knocks on every one of the favorites, if you will, and you have been quite candid in your discussion, at least in a few of the rooms that the chat rooms that I've seen on this victory. So of Mind That Bird. Let's talk about the Derby briefly in retrospect, and the upcoming Preakness with Rachel Alexander on the fence. What do you think?
Well, first of all, on the Derby, everybody always feels the sort of need to justify why did it happen. Well, one of the things we like about this game is there isn't a why answer all the time. It's just you're going to see some crazy results. And what really happened in this Derby was, I've never seen a situation where you could say in the last 3 to 4 weeks, 4 of the legitimate favorites, with a Pamplemousse and Old Fashioned and Quality Road, and then the day of the race, I Want Revenge, ended up being scratched. And what was a very interesting race, from a talent standpoint, came down to a race where there wasn't an enormous amount of talent necessarily in the race. And when, we always say, bad horses win bad races. Now, this is obviously not a bad race or bad horses, but relatively speaking for a Derby, it was sort of a weak race. So a horse that was improbable, his chances of winning are more likely because there isn't such a disparity among the horses. And I don't think it's so inconceivable that had, a healthy Quality Road and I Want Revenge run in the race and run their races, that Mind That Bird would have been the long shot that clunked up to fill out the exacta. And people wouldn't be talking about this monstrous, unbelievable move. They'd be talking about a logical result where a long shot got in, which happens in many derbies. Ultimately, I don't know, maybe he's a horse that was, I know he was misridden in his races because I bet him in the Borderland Derby, and he did not get a good ride, to be kind. And maybe he's just a horse that wanted to make one run from last. Think about the difference. Just as a weird example, how about a Sun King, a very nice horse, but never a grinder and often close to the pace? Then you think when they dropped him back to last in the Commonwealth, the Met, the Whitney, the kind of races he ran in those races. Some horses need to be ridden a certain way, and maybe this horse just wants to make one run from last. It's probably the wet track. He's probably not going to come back and do so well, but you know what? I don't think it's inconceivable that he's just a monstrous one-run closer.
Now, the synthetic horses, specifically Pioneer of the Nile, did not run that badly given the track and everything.
No question about it. I mean, Pioneer Mile definitely ran better than I thought he would. I mean, I did not like him at all. But he did not run better than he ran on the synthetics. He ran the same race basically he'd been running on the synthetics. There was this sort of notion that because I Want Revenge, who he had been beating, ran so well on the dirt that Pioneer of the Nile would do it. Well, that's just folly, because I Want Revenge was a dirt horse who clearly was hampered by the synthetics. It wasn't clear that Pioneer of the Nile would be that horse, and he wasn't. What he is a very nice, honest racehorse that runs well on all surfaces, but he's not an exceptional talent on any of them.
All right, now we'll switch to exceptional talent, and that's what Rachel Alexander did in the Oaks, and the prospect of her facing the boys in the Preakness. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, from a standpoint of adding excitement at the race, it's like the most exciting thing you can imagine, because while we're all looking forward to seeing Mind That Bird come back and see how he does, it doesn't really. That race has no punch without her. So she makes the race from just a sort of mildly interesting race to a very, very interesting race. Now, I think she's probably going to win. On the other hand, you have a horse that ran the race she ran in Kentucky Oaks, and then they're pointing her for the Acorn on Belmont Day. And suddenly she switched to a new barn, and within a matter of days, she's running in a mile and 3/16 Preakness in a very big field. In general, I don't want to bet on horses at short prices that are running in races very shortly after another race that there was never an intention for them to run in. And no criticism of Hal Wiggins, because he did a tremendous job with her. Obviously, a lot of people feel that Steve Asmussen can improve her. Not unreasonable. I don't think he's going to be able to do a lot in 10 days or a week. So I think that she's a vulnerable horse in this race. And, as an Irish shill that I am, obviously I would prefer that she was waiting and running in the Belmont. But I'm not sure that wouldn't be a better idea overall. But you know what? She's still the favorite, and she's still probably going to win.
And Andy, last I heard, you, if they're paying you, you're not shilling. They're paying you. And by the way, Andy, I also believe this: if they're going to pay you, you got to be smart enough to show up, right?
Absolutely. I agree. I'm for all things good for Naira and for our fans. And look, I mean, who knows? Maybe she'll show up again. This is a very interesting year because the superiority of the 3-year-olds this year to the older horses could be enormous. And when you have races coming up, now obviously the Jim Dandy and Saratoga are the 3-year-old races, but we used to see a lot of 3-year-olds in the Whitney. I mean, this is a year where it's not impossible that people could run their 3-year-olds, even the horses that might be a third choice in a Haskell or a Jim Dandy, and decide to run them in the Whitney and might end up being the favorite.
Andy, speaking of Rachel Alexander, whether she runs in the Preakness or the Belmont or someplace else, one thing I'd like to get your thoughts on when you're handicapping either Triple Crown races or similar big races is that people have a tendency, particularly with the Kentucky Derby, but even to the Preakness and the Belmont, they have a tendency to handicap it differently than they would